Hi there, today I'm going to show you how you can easily create all of your Phaser 3 animations by loading in an external JSON file. So typically in Phaser 3 in the examples, when you want to go ahead and create a new animation, what you'll need to do is you'll need to load in your sprite sheet in your preload method with the asset that you want to use. Once you do this and your asset's loaded, you can then tell Phaser your configuration for the animation you'd like to create, and then this will go to the animation manager. And so typically what the configuration looks like is you provide your key, your frames that make up that animation, which asset you're using, and then any other options that you want to specify for your animation, such as like your frame rate, if you want it to repeat, and things like that. And so this is pretty straightforward. However, as your game grows in scale, or if you're using a large number of animations, then what's going to happen is your code's going to start to look like this, where you're going to have a bunch of configuration code that's just for setting up your animations, and you're not actually doing anything else with them in your game. And so an alternate way to go ahead and create these configurations is we can provide this as a JSON file to Phaser, and we can go ahead and load that in, and Phaser will automatically create our animation configurations for us. And so there's a built-in method on the Phaser loader plugin called animation that'll allow you to go ahead and provide this JSON file, or you can do an array of JSON files if you have a bunch of different animations. And so go ahead and use this method. All you have to do in your preload method is you can tell the loader like, hey, here is the path to the JSON like to load, here's the cache key, and then Phaser's going to go ahead and load all that in. And once it's fully loaded, it's going to then go ahead and create all of the animations on the animation manager. So then that way you'll be able to use them in your code. And so by using this method, we can easily convert our code like this down to one line of code where we load in our configuration. And so this is a really great way for us to go ahead and separate our code tied to our configuration from our code that's actually used for our game. And it'll help us write much cleaner code as it scales up. And so to see an example of this, what we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to take this code here and we're going to go ahead and create our animation JSON file to see how this actually works. Let's go ahead and do this. What we're going to go ahead and do is we need to create a JSON file. So I went ahead and created an empty JSON file that just has this empty object. And now what we need to do is basically need to take all of our configurations here and move them over here. And so to go ahead and do this, the first thing we need to do is we need to create a property on our object called anims. And this is just going to be our animation configurations. And Phaser is going to look for this key when it loads in our file. So then this is going to be an array of objects, and these will be our configurations that we want to use in our game. And so basically what we need to do is we just need to copy this configuration here, and we're going to go ahead and bring it over here. All right, then what we need to do is now we just need to make this valid JSON. So what we need to do is for each of our keys on our object, we need to make sure they're in double quotes. Then likewise, for anything where we're using single quotes, we need to replace those with double quotes. So as an example, what this is going to end up looking like is this here. So we'll have our key with our key that we're using for this animation, so we can reference it in our code. We'll need to add in the type field, and we're just going to call it frame. And then we need to go ahead and provide our frames array. And so for each of our animation configurations, we need to provide the frames that will make up the animation. And so we'll go ahead and specify those here. Next, we'll have our default texture key. So this is going to be the texture or the image, the sprite sheet that we went ahead and loaded beforehand. So we can create our animation. And then any other options that we want to specify for configuration, we can provide those here. And so what's really great about this method is anything that's available in the configuration that we pass when we call this anims create, we can pass the exact same thing here in our object, and Phaser will use those properties to create our configuration. All right, so now this is just one of our configurations for animation. And so typically what you need to do is now we need to do this for each type of our animations that we want to create. So we see we have these 4 NPCs here. We would need now 4 objects inside this array here. All right, and just to save some time, I'm going to go ahead and paste over what our configuration will look like. So basically all I did here is now I have an object for each one of my configurations here inside this JSON here. So once we have this file, what we can go ahead and do is now in our create method, we can get rid of all of our code that's tied to creating our configuration. And what we're going to do is we're going to replace this with some code in our preload method. So now what we need to do is in our preload method, we need to go ahead and use our Phaser 3 loader plugin. And we want to go ahead and reference the animation file type. And so now here, this will be like any other file we want to go ahead and load. So we need to go ahead and provide the key of where this will be stored in our cache. I'm just going to call this animation JSON. And then we need to provide our URL to where this JSON file is. So in this example, it's going to be under assets, it's going to be under data, and that's going to go ahead and be animations.json. So now once we do this, Phaser's going to go ahead and load in our JSON file. And then once all of our loading is done, it's going to go ahead and create those animation configurations so they're available to us. And now we can reference them like we did before on our game objects. And so just to see an example, what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to comment out this line of code here. I'm going to come back to my browser so we can see our example. And so see now in our scene, we have these 4 NPCs. They're all using the default frame. And they're not actually animating anymore. And if we checked our console, it would say that our animation does not exist. And that's because we removed our configuration. Now, the moment we go ahead and save and we add in this line here to load in our JSON, we'll see our scene will refresh. We now have our 4 NPCs, and they're not all doing their walking animation that's tied to the NPC that's in our game. All right, and so by using the simple built-in method to our Phaser 3 loader plugin, we saw how we could easily move our configuration from our code that's tied to creating our animations to a separate JSON file, and then go ahead and just load in that JSON file using one line of code, and we can easily recreate everything we were doing before in all these lines of code. And so this is just just as a recap, this is available to us on our Phaser 3 loader plugin. If you use your animation method, this allows you to provide that JSON file with our animation configurations. Just something to keep in mind is any of your properties that are available to you when you create your animation configuration, you can pass those in your JSON file, and Phaser will use those when it creates your configurations. All right, with that brings this video to an end. So as a reminder, there's a link in the description of the video to the play source code for this video. And as always, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the content. If you did enjoy the video, please consider liking the video and hitting the bell icon to be notified when the next video is released. For more great Phaser 3 content, please see the links on your screen now.